Hi, everyone. My name's David Brown. As Ben said, I'm head of strategy at Knotch. I'm happy to be with a good friend, Robert Rose, uh, chief evangelist, I think, at the Content Marketing Institute. And we're going to get into a conversation around some of the characteristics of high-performing content organizations. This is something which Robert and I have been tracking for a number of years, observing, helping, cajoling, consulting. Robert, it's great to see you. How's everything with you?
It's going great here, David. I mean, this is fantastic. I'm hopeful at some point we're going to get to do this in person and not have to do this, virtually. It's forever and ever. But it's great to be here nonetheless. I'm super excited to be here with you at Knotch here.
That's great. So what's the latest in the world of connecting content to objectives and business outcomes? Are we getting better at doing that or not?
Yeah, it's funny. There are so many things that are going on right now with content objectives and stuff. I'm curious, just to start off our conversation here, where I mean, obviously measurement is something that you guys think a lot about in terms of content and measuring things and what's actually going on with your clients. And the research that we do every year at Content Marketing Institute, we're still finding that so much of measurement is around these vanity metrics, right? Everything from web visits to downloads to shares and those sorts of things. And this is the way that they're managing measurement. And I wonder what you're seeing from your lens, the lens that you look through every day, how best-in-class content marketers are actually measuring what they're doing.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think the early stage content teams are very focused on efficiencies, creating more content for less money or faster. And what we've come to realize is that efficiency is really an internal measure. It's not really an external measure. But the three outcomes which consistently recur are one, enhancing brand, two, improving ROI, and three is building an audience, specifically around first-party data, given the demise of the third-party cookie. And so building brand seems to be top, and I think ROI is a close second, harder to get to. I had a question, Robert, for you, because in your study from the Content Marketing Institute, and hopefully you can see a slide. If the back room could show the slide. Well, anyway, within your recent study, excellent industry study, the top three goals were all about brand building. And then you asked a separate question around metrics, and there were no brand metrics. So it sounded like content teams were talking the right game about brand building, awareness, and preference, but the metrics weren't really following. And so there's a gap there. I just wondered, why is that? Is that on purpose, or is that just a maturity issue?
Well, this marketing stuff is hard. So, I'll say this. Two interesting points that I'll put to this, and this is something that we've seen a trend over the last, I mean, we're coming into this new phase, this new 2021, re-entering the new normal, the next normal, whatever we're calling it these days. But we've seen a real shift. And I think it gets to your point a bit about brand, which is if we go back 5-6 years, we see most of the content marketing strategies getting set up, the teams getting set up to really focus on what I would call direct marketing, right? Direct lead acquisition, inquiry acquisition types of programs. And so in many ways, the granular sort of measurement became, some of those sort of high level, how are we driving more inquiries to our business? And over time, what we've seen over the last, call it 6 months, 8 months, is a real shift where, if let's call it, if 10 of the projects we worked on in 2019 were about setting up a content team to focus in on direct marketing initiatives, lead generation, most pronounced. 9 of those were about that, and 1 was about brand. And now that is exactly reversed. What we're seeing coming out of the pandemic is really brand in many ways driving the CMO's office, in some ways driving some of these new purpose-driven, content-driven strategies, and where the teams are really focusing in on the brand. I think what we see in the measurement, to the point of your question, is brand metrics generally being a hard thing to put our arms around as marketers. It's a difficult thing to do. And I think we're seeing these content teams try and pivot a bit to start looking at brand and purpose-driven strategies and how to measure those things. So I think it feels like early days there. And I think what we're seeing is this sort of lag, if you will, of, we're still measuring things in those vanity metrics, but we're hoping to figure out how to do, more brand-driven programs. So I think, quite honestly, it's a focus of evolution and learning for most teams.
I agree. We all need to be very clear about which parts of our content strategy are building brands, and conversely, which parts of our content strategy could actually be hurting our brand. It's quite possible that your content could be fully engaging your audience and at the same time hurting your brand. So it's engagement on its own is only part of the story.
Yeah, well, it's a great point, and it begs a question, which I know you're hot on, which is this idea of where did the big idea go, right? Where are the big ideas in our company, and how can we get content teams to be more aligned with some of those big ideas? So many of this companies we speak with these days, they're seen as this on-demand vending machine of content, right? They're seen as, you're here to produce assets over assets over assets. As I sometimes too cutely say, we've got assets coming out of our assets. And, but when you're thinking about these bigger ideas, these bigger, more strategic ideas, are there ways that these content marketing teams can get out, of always being so tactical, and can we start to elevate the content strategy to being something that is more brand or more strategic in nature?
Yeah, I think that's it's a subject close to my heart. There's absolutely no shortage of content in our world. Every topic, subtopic, micro topic is covered, but there's a great shortage of ideas. The Miami Ad School did a study last year amongst their brilliant students. They said, when you think about the content environment, content arena, what do you see? And they did a visual exercise and actually produced a picture of what you may call the Soviet Union, kind of an empty warehouse, a dystopia, a world completely devoid of ideas. And I think this is really content teams' next opportunity, is to take responsibility for driving memorable, distinct ideas. Much content, if you bring all the banks or insurance companies together, if you put your thumb over their logo, it's almost impossible to discern which brand is talking to you. So you need to make content visually distinct. It's not just the words, it's about the sound it makes, the identity which it provides. The other approach is to use resonance, is to find an idea which truly resonates with your audience and makes them think differently about you, and about something which is important for the business. If you can find the cross-section of distinctness, resonance, both for the audience and for the business, you're probably onto a big idea. And I think one of the characteristics I've seen of leading content organizations is that the content leader actually becomes responsible for the big idea. It isn't the content team reporting to the brand team. Actually, the content team becomes the brand team as well. And brand strategy and content strategy comes closer together. Is that something you've seen, Robert, in your observations of content teams relating to brand teams?
It's funny. They yes, a big the big merge, as we've come to call it these days, where if we looked at 3 to 5 years ago, even as short a time ago as that, we saw companies thinking about big content marketing plans and hiring editorial strategists and journalists and great storytellers, great content creators, and then content strategy, content operations was handled somewhere else. And we're starting to see now that the high performing teams are really merging those models together, where content as a strategy becomes a function in the business and is joined together, and in many ways can de-silo a lot of what's gone on in the way that digital marketing has been constructed over the last 8 to 10 years. So we're seeing this new model emerge, where a content team, a high performing content team, starts to understand better what its objectives are as a business strategy. In other words, as it's supposed to drive brand, as it's supposed to drive efficiency with content, as it's supposed to drive storytelling, and also as it's supposed to drive measurability, and really understanding the balance of those models to be able to say, here are the resources we need for this part of the business objective. Here's the resources and tools that we need for this part of the objective, and really becoming a much more organized function as content, not necessarily siloed off into, here are the storytellers and here are the the plumbers, as it were, but really pulling those things together into a more cohesive, what would be broadly called an enterprise content strategy. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a really good thing, that content as a function becomes more strategic and more multifaceted from a skill set position.
Right. Yes. The last thing we need content to be is yet another silo. Silo is truly the enemy, and the content teams I see thriving are the ones who are actually brilliant collaborators. They travel across the organization, across the customer journey, and have the ability to connect their work to business outcomes, and also saying no, because content teams get asked to do a lot of stuff because they're creative, they're collaborative, they're close to you, but actually they can be quite distracting. And if content teams can be religious about connecting their work to the right business outcomes, if someone asks you to do something which connects to a pet project of some other line of business, which isn't your business outcome, then that gives you the license to say no, so that you don't get distracted and resources diluted.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned the sort of saying no part, because in so many ways that is such a shift. That's the biggest shift that we see happening, where high performing teams can really start to shine, which is, we often talk about, shared editorial calendars and the ability to look at what we're going to be producing over the next 5 months, 6 months, even 1 month. And in so many ways, content right now remains a to-do list, right? More than a calendar. So our calendars simply become the orders that the content team is trying to fulfill, rather than the forward-looking strategy or the calendar that's there. And so it's that formalization of the operating model, and plus the business objectives, like you spoke to, that really play that difference into being saying, here is the strategy for what we're trying to achieve, and let the content team become a leader of that strategy instead of just the follower of it. In other words, the sort of support for it, and sort of getting out of the content team being the internal Kinkos where you go to get stuff done that, may fulfill other objectives, but rather having its own strategic business objectives and measurement, and leading that strategy so that it can become more proactive instead of always being in reactive mode.
That's right. So those editor-in-chiefs and brilliant journalists who've now joined corporate America actually have to have their strategy hat on and really work that muscle, because actually most of their work is probably not going to be creating. It's going to be creating a strategy and then holding the strategy. Well, I had a connected question to you and Ganska, our CEO, shared an idea earlier about the chief content officer reporting not to the CMO or head of brand or head of corporate communications, but to the CEO, almost at the same level as the CMO or the head of communications. What are you seeing in terms of the most effective place for a content team to sit, and what the right reporting line is?
I think that depends on the business for sure, but I think, overall, what I feel like is that the stories of bifurcating, trifurcating, or even, sort of segmenting out the CMO's job is becoming a little overblown, in my opinion. There's lots of articles around, is the job of marketing too big for one person in this as a CMO? And so you have to start thinking about chief digital officer, chief content officer, chief experience officer, all of these kinds of things. And to me, I think as a generality, and this is a generality for sure, I think chief content officer to me is more of a function than a title. And so I see that title sit within many areas. There was a wonderful article that talked about the pressures of the brand. It was in, I think, Media Post not too long ago about, and one of the the CMOs that was interviewed said, my job these days is more editor in chief than it really is anything else. And so I think in so many ways, the chief content officer in many businesses might be, sort of just, trying to segment out part of what the CMO is trying to do. But in some businesses, absolutely, especially more media focused businesses, the chief content officer, that function where the content model may be more revenue generating or actually maybe a separate division of the business. Absolutely right.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think in some ways to view it as a singular job title is a bit misleading, because often I think what you and I both see is that it's actually a small team where there's an audience expert, there may be a creative leader, and then a performance expert who come together to kind of perfectly meet the needs of the audience, but through a drum beat of a performance team. So it's the office of the chief content officer, not necessarily for one person, but maybe a team of 2 or 3, which makes it scalable because skill sets are quite distinct in that area. Robert, who's your favorite? Yeah. If you were to pick a favorite company, like who you think is really doing a great job at the moment, who are you excited about? Maybe they're listening.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'll just say quickly, because I know we need to wrap here, but basically on the B2C side, it would be silly of me not to mention what Lego is doing, because Lego is, of course, just smashing it when it comes to content. On the B2B side, I'll mention a company that I'm loving right now. What they're doing is ServiceNow, the workflow company, and what they're doing with their quarterly CEO magazine is just absolutely spectacular.
That's great. ServiceNow is in Knotch's pros and cons community, so I've been reading about them. Robert, it's great to see you. Thank you very much for joining the discussion. I hope you have a chance to stay for some of the other sessions, and thank you, audience, for listening to Robert and I ramble on. Feel free to reach out to either of us or both of us if you want to continue the conversation. This is a subject close to our hearts. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much.
Bye.